Well, you've had me with you for nearly 3 months. And during that time, Jeannie has been zooming in from Columbus, Ohio. Jeannie is a former congregant, and she's been telling you how great I am. And that's all true. But maybe the time has come for me to tell you a little story of one of the countless times I was not at my best. Just after Easter, back in '98, I was in Boston for the first time in my life. The denomination had invited me, along with all the other newbie ministers, for a "How's your first year in the parish going?" workshop. Let me tell you, after 6 years in the Bay Area, by that point, Boston can be really chilly, even in the middle of April. If memory serves, we gathered on a Thursday and wrapped up late on Sunday afternoon. They gave us Sunday morning off. Now, I wanted to be the proverbial good minister, so I thought I'd check out the most traditional Unitarian Universalist church in our movement that morning, King's Chapel, just off the Boston Common. And yes, indeed, you go in and there are boxes to sit in instead of pews or chairs. And if my historical understanding is correct, families would donate to the church for their box. The larger, the more the family donated, the closer to the front of the church was the box. Thankfully, that practice has long been out of fashion. And so, as the obvious newcomer that morning, I ended up with a whole box to myself. This wasn't exactly neighborly, but I appreciated the elbow room. In front of me were a couple of familiar gray hymnals, as well as some other small books. Both were printed for King's Chapel alone. One was a prayer book, unique to them, and the other a small supplemental hymnal. The service started before I could do anything more than begin to leaf through them. Soon I was doing my best to juggle this and that and that and this, and it wasn't long before I was completely lost, and not just lost. Now, I told you this was a story of when I wasn't my best. Instead of, in that moment of being lost, wisely thinking to myself, wow, this is a far cry from what I'm used to. Let's just sit back and wait until I can get caught up again. Instead of that, I became angry. And I don't know if this happens to any of you, but when I can't do what I want to do, sometimes I go from 0 to 60. And in the time it takes to snap your fingers, I enter an internal, forgive the language, pissy fit. I had been ordained into our ministry just the month before. I grew up in this faith tradition. I was supposed to know how things went, I thought. And yes, King's Chapel was an outlier. I chose to go there for the different experience, but I got more than I expected. And to make it worse, as I said before, there was no one else in my box, so there was no one to look on with or to ask for a helping hand. So I did what I sometimes do. I took that uncertainty, that feeling bad, and I turned it into anger. I mean, why feel bad when you can feel angry, right? I mean, and in that sense of being angry, as a newcomer, surely I wasn't to blame. They just needed to work on being more welcoming. Maybe, but it's a historic congregation. They do their thing. And then their minister, the Reverend Carl Scoville, stepped up onto the raised dais and began preaching. Remember, this is April of '98, about the television show Cheers and the human need to belong. Those of you with enough years under your belt may remember the show's theme song, Where Everyone Knows Your Name. Now, I'm not going to sing it, but just to really quickly, making your way in the world today, maybe I am singing it. Takes everything you've got Taking a break, if you know it, sing along. Taking a break from all your worries sure would help a lot. Wouldn't you like to get away? Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name. And that's the refrain, where everyone knows your name. Yeah. And in the TV show, that place was a basement tavern in downtown Boston. And for me, listening to Reverend Scoville, it was finally in my box on a Sunday morning. Oh, finally, a Unitarian Universalist message I could get in with. Yes, belonging does matter. Now I feel I belong to something I've been a part of my whole life. Now, time is short. I'm looking at the clock and I'm looking at my notes, and we're going to skip ahead, so this may be a little awkward. There's another story I want to tell, and maybe it's because Marilyn, Canadian National, is our worship associate today, but it's a story about 3 weeks in Ottawa during my 4 years as the minister of the congregation there. In the winter of 22, I imagine it caught at least some of the news here, the Freedom Convoy, where 100 truckers drove 100 semi-trailers, the cabs, to downtown Ottawa and sort of circled the Parliament, occupied Ottawa, kept their trucks running morning, noon, and night. Well, people live in downtown Ottawa. It's not that big a city. One of them was that congregation's Lindley, our music director, and her husband and their 4-year-old daughter, who saw a sign, her name was Rennie, who saw a F. Trudeau, the then Prime Minister, sign. "What do they mean, Mommy?" Mommy had to translate really quickly. "Darling, they're saying I'm angry." A really good response, at least in my book. These were people who were protesting the Canadian government's COVID restrictions, which were more significant than any here. There, the federal government can say, you're going to close your business, and people would close their businesses. Here, it wouldn't have worked anywhere near as, dare I say, nicely or efficiently. But even up in the Great White North, there was a response to this. It really hurt the trucking industry. People left that industry. There was a guy who, in his 30s, was saying, I can't make a living as a trucker now. Maybe it's time to learn a trade that I can practice at home so I'll have more time with my kids. He became a tattoo artist. And at that time, I realized it's important to listen first to where people are coming from and their stories of their life. If they share their ideology with you, you have to go deeper. And so I remember finding an adage from a man named Dave Shearer saying simply, hear the biography, not the ideology. Not unwise words. Now, what if I tell you that Shearer is a hip-hop youth pastor whose stage name takes his goal and makes his goal and method clear? He goes by the name of agape, the ancient Greek word for the highest form of love. And someone who followed him for a while, Benjamin Mathis, has this to say on agape's message. When someone has a point of view we find difficult to understand, disagreeable, or even offensive, it helps to look to the set of circumstances that person has experienced that resulted in that point of view. Get their story, their biography, if you will, and you'll open up the real possibility of an understanding that transcends disagreement. Like the roots of a tree, our stories, which create our beliefs, we'll come back to that, if not this Sunday, in future Sundays. Our stories, which create our beliefs, are completely unique and also always connected. It's through story that we find common ground enough to coexist in the face of great, often necessary tension. When you find yourself in disagreement, just ask one question. Will you tell me your story? I'd love to know how you came to this point of view. All right, that's 2 questions. Years ago, when I was a wee child in my first year in seminary, I read again and again that while Unitarians were not Trinitarians, we did lift up a so-called Holy Trinity of freedom, reason, and tolerance. Tolerance is tricky, my friends. It's necessary, but it's only a stepping stone towards something that is a much better goal, and that's respect. When we hear people's stories, almost always we will find a story of someone worthy of respect, if we're patient enough. Ben and I will be before you next week, and I'm going to end this with what I thought might be the reading for next week. We'll have to find another one. One of the people I go to again and again for wisdom and expanding my understanding is a farmer and a poet, Wendell Berry. And the closing of his book, Sex, Reason, and Economy, something like that, he says this: if I merely tolerate my neighbors on the assumption that all of us are equal, that means I can take no interest in the question of which ones of us are right and which ones may be wrong. It means that I am denying the community the use of my intelligence. It means I am not prepared to defer to those whose abilities are superior to mine, or to help those whose condition is worse. It means I can be as self-centered as I please. He continues, in order to survive, a plurality of true communities would require not egalitarianism and tolerance, but knowledge, an understanding of the necessity of local differences, and respect. Respect, I think, always implies imagination, the ability to see one another across our inevitable differences as living souls. And that book is properly titled Sex, Economy, Freedom, and Community. In order for people to feel they belong, they need to know that their stories, while unique, do have commonality to those around them. I know for myself that the more I get to know someone, the more I say, wow, would I have done the same if I were in their shoes? The wiser I get, the more humble I become. I may have shared this line in closing of another Sunday. You'll probably hear me say it again. But when it comes to being with one another, whether we're talking loving partners or strangers at the bus stop, in order to form a bond, this is what Barbara Hamilton Hallway recommends. And it's also a reading I've used at wedding ceremonies. You'll understand why. Truly listen to each other. Speak what each must speak. Be ready to disarm your own heart. To which I can only add, so may it be. Amen. And with thought still perhaps resonating, let me invite us all to rise in body or spirit once more